Hey there, this is Dave from The Greg and Dave Show. Thank you for listening to the following broadcast here on Public House Media.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
It is the eve of the final game of most regular seasons, and hopefully you are in the playoffs or in line to make the playoffs. Hopefully not on the outside looking in, but if you are, maybe you have a toilet bowl to play for. Maybe there's some other things that are going on. I'm Scott Wisniewski. I'm joined by Robert Gardner, Public House Media, and boy, I'm telling you, this is like early Christmas for me this time of year, because usually a couple of my teams are in the playoffs. This year, 5 of my 7 are in for sure, and a 6th one is on the bubble. The other one's only got 2 wins. We won't talk about that one. But it's definitely the time of the year where you start to get stoked, and it's a tough time to manage your team, though, too, because there's a lot of things that are going to happen, Robert. You're going to have some players in Week 16 and 17. That's why hopefully you don't play Week 17 championships, get benched because their teams are in good shape. You're going to have what happened York happen, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you're going to have distractions that might keep you from putting your lineup in. You might miss the fact that there's some Saturday games that are going to come up in the next couple weeks. Stay focused. If you're in this for the long haul, and don't let those distractions get in the way. Robert, how was your weekend?
You know, it was a pretty exciting weekend. I beat our defending league champion in our head-to-head matchup, so feel real good. Positioned myself okay for the playoffs, not where I'd like to be, but at least I'm in the right position to get in this week. So really exciting time, really excited for that playoff push.
Well, and along those same lines, it's why I keep saying, and I've been saying for years, you just have to get in. Yeah, it would be nice to get a bye, be a 1st or 2nd seed. But you just got to get in, because weird things happen this time of the year. Guys pop up out of nowhere like we've seen over the last few weeks that become good waiver pickups. Some guys fall off, like perhaps Kareem Hunt was about in this show. You never know what's going to happen, but you can't win it unless you're in it, and hopefully you are. So let's talk about some of the news. And we sent out our show rundown to each other a couple hours ago. That was before the news, which now becomes, I think, our lead story. And we talked about it a little bit off there. Eli Manning benched as the quarterback for the New York Giants. Obviously, it's been a tough year if you've been an Eli owner. I do have him in a couple leagues as a backup, as a QB2. In one league, he's my 3rd quarterback because I just picked him up. But I don't think he deserves this. He's had some rough go with Beckham being out for most of the year, Brandon Marshall out for most of the year. Sterling Shepard was out for a lot of the year, then back, then out with the migraines. It's a little hard to pin this all on him. I think there's a little self-preservation happening by Ben McAdoo. But your thoughts on Eli Manning, both from the story itself and the fantasy impact it may or may not have?
I think as far as a fantasy impact goes, I think it's really minimal at this point, because I think if Eli was your every week starter at this point in the season, then you had a really flawed team to begin with. But
unless you were good everywhere else, and you could.
No, yeah, absolutely. But I think as far as what this says about the Giants organization is they're in disarray at this point. They have no idea what they're doing. This isn't how you handle your veteran starter at this point, especially when you haven't been able to run the ball, you haven't been able to protect him, and you haven't been able to keep weapons on the field around him because of injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think I also mentioned this off the air. I'm not a fan of Ben McAdoo's. I haven't been a fan of his. I don't like the way he handled the Josh Brown situation, protecting him and supporting him through some of that terrible, terrible stuff that he did. I feel like he's kind of to cover his rear end for the fact that a team underachieved and is actually not even the best team that plays in that stadium, which says a whole lot. Let's talk about some of the other interesting players, and then we'll get into some of our normal segments. But as I was kind of pondering some things this weekend, a couple of things really stood out. So today, a news story, Josh Gordon expected to practice with the team and play against the Chargers. I'm still not sure, just because of the uncertainty of Kaiser at quarterback, how big of an impact Josh Gordon, who again, he's practicing. He hasn't been on a field in game situations in almost 2 years. There's intrigue because he was once dynamic, but does he still have it, and is he worth even taking a look at?
I think absolutely he's worth taking a look at, especially in the deeper leagues. He could be a good pocket sleeper to have in the playoffs should he get on the field and things start to click and work.
Sure. And, I suppose if you, again, I always preface all of this with the caveat, if you have the roster spot. So I suppose if you have a roster spot and you don't necessarily need to pick up Gordon to start this week, and you can play a little wait and see to see how that plays out, maybe he's a good pickup. So the other guy that really struck my fancy, and I'm going to talk about Ezekiel Elliott in a minute, and I guess they're kind of tied hand in hand. So Rod Smith has been impressive, so much so that Darren McFadden was released late Sunday night. And so Rod Smith could even be a guy. So if Ezekiel Elliott comes back even earlier than his suspension, I don't think we're going to see Elliott get 95% of the snaps anymore. I think Rod Smith has proven to be dynamic. Here's the gamble. So there's a hearing coming up on Friday that could shorten, perhaps, Elliott's suspension. He could likely, if things stay status quo, he won't be back till week 16, which will be your championship. I actually picked him up in a league because I do have a bye in week 14. If I can get by in week 15, I have myself a guy that can help me win a championship. Again, it's a gamble. It's a roll of the dice. At the same token, if Elliott comes back early, say he gets his suspension reduced and he's back to play December 3rd or December 10th, right? Then Rod Smith loses some value. So how do you navigate those rocky waters when you talk about Ezekiel Elliott and or Rod Smith?
It's really about kind of how your team is positioned and kind of what your playoff run is looking like. If you're pretty strong everywhere and you're really kind of gaming for that championship, I think you lean more towards the Elliott play. If you're a bubble team, I think you got to go with what's working right now and what's getting the carries right now. So I think if you're a bubble team, you go with Rod Smith.
Sure, and in my case, in the league that I picked him up, so I'm going to get a first round bye. I've been very, very subpar at running back, and my receivers and quarterback have carried. So I'm rolling the dice thinking, look, if I get to the championship game, I'm going to need some help at running back. And that's the reason I went out and made the move. So again, it all really depends on the situation you're in. Another guy that was interesting last week, a couple quick ones, and we'll move on. D.D. Westbrook. Forget about the game he had production-wise. I always tell people when you're looking to waiver wire over and you're trying to pick up receivers that might help you, production's important, but the number of targets, I think, is even more important. Westbrook was targeted 11 times last week against Arizona. With Hearns being banged up, with obviously Allen Robinson missing the full season, Marquise Lee hitting a little bit of a wall, he might be the best right now in Jacksonville.
No, absolutely, and I think his targets are a direct reflection of that. And I'm like you in your school of thought. I think targets generally translate into production for these guys, and the more opportunities you get, the more chances you have for these guys to score you points for your fantasy team.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other situation. So Doug Martin looked like he was having a decent first half and everything was going great. And then he ended up getting a concussion. He's in concussion protocol. So he plays Tampa Bay, plays the Green Bay Packers this week. And it should be a good matchup for whoever's running the ball. It's starting to look, at least early indications are that it might be either Jacquizz Rodgers, Peyton Barber, or a combination of both. do you roll the dice again? If you're on a bubble, right? This might be the week where you just have to strictly play matchups because you're trying to get in. Is it worth a shot on one of those guys?
It's got to be a coin flip situation. I don't really trust what the Buccaneers are going to do here. I don't have any good indication if they're going to lead one way or the other, and that makes it really hard if you want a definitive play at this point in your season. It's hard to, you're really rolling the dice on this move here.
Sure. Now, and I agree with you. The other news and notes, and it changed a little bit. So Michael Crabtree originally was suspended for 2 games for that just ridiculous, embarrassing fight with Talib. It's his breaking news is his suspension has been dropped down to 1 game. So he will be back for your playoffs. But if you were counting on Michael Crabtree to help you get into the postseason, you won't be able to count on him this week as he is out. He has been suspended. Okay. So normally I've had people, friends of mine, some of my personal fantasy football network ask me questions about who to start this week. And there's still some of those, and we're saving some of those Thursday. But I found 4 really interesting questions about waiver wire quandaries. So all these people have a chance to still submit waiver claims before 3 a.m. tomorrow morning, right? So they want to know if so Jim, for example, my buddy Jim, he needs a running back. I think it's from what I understand, he's unsure if, what's going to happen with Devontae Freeman, and he wants to have some cushion if he has to start one of these guys. So his 2 options, Devontae Booker or Aaron Eckler from I almost said San Diego again, from the Chargers. I don't know that any one of them is a great start, but if you had to pick one, who would you pick of those 2?
I think if I had to pick one, I'd probably lean towards Booker because I think he's going to get more carries and more opportunities in the offense.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. C.J. Anderson just continues to be, to be quite honest, just flat. I mean, he had 1 decent game, and that's really been about it. Chris needs a wide receiver for 1 week, Jamison Crowder or Seth Roberts. I think I see what he's doing there. Seth Roberts obviously going to get some of the action that would have normally gone to Michael Crabtree. I think if you're looking for something long-term, I say it's Crowder. Short-term, maybe Roberts is the pick if it's just a 1 week sort of quandary.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one. It just depends on kind of what you're looking for. Are you looking for that week-to-week filler? If that's the case, Rodgers is your guy. If you're looking to have a player established on your team for that playoff push, then you want to go with Crowder.
He's Robert Gardner. I'm Scott Wisniewski. It's the Tuesday edition of the Fantasy Wizards on Public House Media. Tony's looking for one of these 2 quarterbacks, Blake Bortles or McCown from the Jets. McCown's been pretty steady. Like, he's been pretty consistent. Bortles has been up and down, and really more down than up. I feel like going with McCown's a better bet. The Jets, again, who would have thought in week 1 we'd be having this conversation, right? But of those 2, who do you like the best?
Honestly, I like McCown, especially this week heading into a matchup with the Chiefs, who are just reeling on defense.
And then Terry has a dilemma. He has Andy Dalton, and he's been starting him pretty much most of the year and still is on the precipice of making the playoffs. He needs to win this week. So good for you. That means your team around you was pretty good because Dalton hasn't had a great year. He's considering not starting Dalton this week and reaching out onto his waiver wire to pick up either Brett Hundley or Jimmy Garoppolo. So here's some interesting angles on this question. So Hundley had his best game as a starter Sunday against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is that without stealing our next segment, was that a miracle or was that a mirage? And Jimmy Garoppolo, if Beathard isn't able to play, Garoppolo is going to get the start. And I don't know that it's the right, that's a really complicated offense to learn under Kyle Shanahan. I don't know that he makes an ideal play at Chicago this week either. Your thoughts?
I think there's a couple things that are stacked up against Garoppolo at this point. I think you're going to see him make some nice throws and some nice plays, but like you said, really complicated offense. Doesn't have a lot of weapons around him. So that's going to affect his fantasy value. And if you look at the weapons that are around Hundley, coming off of a really strong game, I think I think maybe you got to play the hot hand here and see what the kid has.
So let's stick with that for a minute, and let's switch over to Miracle or Mirage. And I'll jump around a little bit just because we're on the subject. So Brent Hundley, was last week a miracle, or do you expect him for however many games he's going to be the starter, whether it's the rest of the year, whether or not they can beat Tampa and Cleveland, and maybe that makes players come back quicker? Do you think he's a guy that can be successful for the next 3 or more weeks?
I don't think I'm 100% sold on Hundley, but I'm coming around. That last game, he really made some nice plays, really made some good decisions with the football. And the guys around him were making plays, and it looked like a different Packers team out there, and I think that bodes well for Hundley moving forward.
Let's stick with the same game. Ben Roethlisberger, was it a mirage because he was playing the Packers? Was it a miracle? I still think Pittsburgh's best chance to go far is to lean on Le'Veon Bell, which means less production from Roethlisberger. So I say mirage with the caveat that I don't think Roethlisberger is terrible, but I don't think you can expect what you saw the last 2 weeks to continue.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, but when I look at Roethlisberger, I always look at the weapons around him too. And he's in a situation where he can explode offensively at any point.
So let's talk about Phillip Rivers, who had a marvelous game on Thanksgiving against Dallas. He's been okay this year, but, he hadn't had the breakout game until this week. Keenan Allen has had back-to-back spectacular weeks. It seems like he's getting some production from other spots out of that receiving core. Miracle or mirage, Phillip Rivers?
I like Phillip Rivers, and I think he sees an opportunity to win a wide open AFC West, and I think you're going to see him play some of the best football we've seen him play all year down the stretch.
I kind of agree. He seems to not have taken a whole lot of hits, too, by looking at his sack total. I think he's fresh. I think why not? Roll the dice while some other quarterbacks are starting to fall off, which we'll get to in our next segment. And lastly, Case Keenum. Look, Case Keenum's been amazing, and yet his own coach won't commit to him beyond week 2. With Teddy Bridgewater, healthy and waiting in the wings, and perhaps Bradford eligible to come back for the postseason. What more does this poor guy have to do?
I think at this point, Case Keenum is just continuing his long audition to be the Cleveland Browns quarterback next season.
Yeah, hey, why not? That could be a perfect fit. Talk about running backs. We talked a little bit about him at the top of the show. Devontae Booker, not a great week last week, but a decent week the week before. What I like about Booker and why I put him on his list is he's getting a lot of touches and a higher percentage of the snaps. Will that continue, or will we see Jamal Charles reinsert himself into the mix?
I think we should expect to see Booker keep his touch total up. He's making the most of those touches at this point between the 3 running backs that Denver has to choose from. And with their putrid quarterback situation, they need something on offense, and he's the best thing they have going right now.
Samaje Perine finally he finally did what I had predicted he was going to do in July, but then lost faith in him and dumped him. So there you go. And so I guess the stamp of approval is when I dump you, you end up being good, and that's the story of my life. But do you think it'll continue? I think for sheer volume, he's the guy, and I think that he'll continue that. But maybe you see it differently.
I do not see it different. Back-to-back 100-yard games. It seems like with the injuries, the offense is going to lean on him and run through him, and it seems like he's been able to rise to the occasion and perform.
I remember having this discussion in preseason, and I was touting Perine's status, and they said, well, come on, they've got Rob Kelly. And I'm like, exactly. They've just got Rob Kelly. So obviously he has a chance to break out. Rob Kelly. When did Rob Kelly become Emmitt Smith, for crying out loud? Peyton Barber. We talked about that mix. If of the 2 backs to have, if Martin, I still think Barber has more upside than Jacquizz Rodgers. We've seen the Jacquizz Rodgers show before. I still think if you're going to go with one, he's the guy. But I think I'm with you. Maybe you stay away from both these guys.
Yeah, I think at this point, there's probably better options on your waiver wire. A P. Ryan or a Booker. even maybe a Marlon Mack is out there for you.
Sure. Jamal Williams had a big game. Montgomery might be back for the Packers this week, maybe. It's a fluid situation just because of all the injuries, but it seems like when Aaron Jones got his chance to shine, he looked good. Williams looked good. What it does show me is there's a lot of people who panned Ted Thompson, the general manager of the Green Bay Packers, for drafting 3 running backs. They've used all 3 of them this year, and 2 of them have been pretty darn good. Your thoughts on Jamal Williams?
I think there's a lot to like there. There's a lot of potential. With how fluid the situation, though, it is kind of tough to trust any Packers running back week to week. It's not a great situation in Green Bay. I think we're starting to see things kind of turn around and get more stable, but it's not all the way there yet for me to fully commit to a player like Williams.
So we talked about Williams, we talked about Aaron Jones, we talked about Perrine. Fournette and Hunt have had some success. McCaffrey. This might be the best year in the history of me playing fantasy football for rookie running backs. And here's another one, Joe Mixon, miracle or mirage?
I think Cincinnati finally figured out that you need to give Joe Mixon the football a lot and give him opportunities, and he's going to produce for you. This is what they drafted Joe Mixon for, but they haven't used him well up until this point, and I think they've kind of turned the corner and realized what they have.
Sure, and by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Dalvin Cook, who unfortunately went out with the injury, but been some really good rookie running backs this year. So I put Blue on. Not because he had a great game, but poor Foreman got hurt after scoring 2 touchdowns. Lamar Miller is still the starting back there, but at some point Houston may fall out of the playoff mix. Would you even roll the dice on someone like Blue?
I don't think I would at this point. If that offense takes another injury, I'm not sure the running game is going to be as strong in Houston.
Here's a guy that's been really, really good for the last 3 or 4 weeks, but Robbie Anderson, man, I'll tell you what, Robbie Anderson's been stellar, and I don't see any reason why you wouldn't continue to ride that wave of momentum that he's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think he's become the favorite target, and I think you got to keep playing that hot hand.
A couple more guys. Mohamed Sanu, first of all, in the 50-some years of Atlanta Falcons history, became the first wide receiver to ever throw a touchdown for the Falcons. But he can do some other things, too, and we saw him get even some more targets when Julio Jones finally had that breakout game that Julio Jones owners have been waiting for. Now we started to see why Mohamed Sanu had some upside when people talked about him before the season starts. Your thoughts on Sanu?
I think I like Sanu at this point because this past weekend it looked like that Atlanta Falcons offense turned the corner, and it looked like they found their rhythm and their identity again. And I hope to see that moving forward, and I think that bodes well for Sanu owners.
Hunter Henry had a couple of in the last couple of weeks, he's starting to look a little like, again, the player people thought he was going to be. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with Phillip Rivers starting to look a little bit more explosive. You're looking for a tight end? Are you looking Hunter Henry's way?
I think I am looking Hunter Henry's way because you mentioned Phillip Rivers starting to turn that corner. Look at these past 2 games, the production Keenan Allen has had, and that has opened up the middle of the field for Hunter Henry to be successful.
So last week I wasn't ready to be a buyer. 2 weeks, does that make a trend? Ricky Seals-Jones. No relation to Seals and Croft, the 70s pop ballad group. 2 touchdowns in back-to-back weeks.
Hey, it's hard to imagine that level of production is going to continue. But if you're in need of a player, he's a guy I think you can insert into your offense and feel confident something's going to happen.
Robert Gardner, Scott Wisniewski, Fantasy Wizards, our Tuesday edition here at Public House Media, getting you ready for your final week of the regular season. We're going to move on to our next segment, keep them or kick them to the curb. And we're going to start with quarterbacks as we always do, and we're going to start with Derek Carr. Again, not advocating benching him, but do you look for other options, or do you think Carr can ride out the storm? Had a decent week last week against a good secondary, but he's had some duds in there as well.
Yeah, I think at this point in the season, with the production we've seen and just the drop rate that you see in Oakland, I don't think that bodes well for Carr's production moving forward. It doesn't seem like they've found any rhythm, and I think at this point you have to look for a better option.
This one might, be a little bit too close to your heart there. Alex Smith, man, I'll tell you what. At one point, he was the 1 or 2 scoring quarterback in fantasy. I'm talking at one point like week 7, week 8, and it seems that that's leveled off, and it's kind of been across the board. With a couple other guys that are on this list as well, which we'll get into in a second. But I think it starts with maybe here. Is there other things? Because I've always told people to watch out for offensive line injuries, and you being a little closer to the situation. What's the reason, and are you ready to give up on Alex Smith as a fantasy producer?
I think I'm ready to give up on him as a fantasy producer. As a Chiefs fan, I'm not ready to give up on him. There's, play calling hasn't been as good, but execution on the field has been atrocious. And when you look at that offensive line specifically, there have been injuries, there have been some fluidity in there with trying to fill guys in, and it just there's been no continuity really since about week 4 on that offensive line. You've seen it deteriorate to what we're seeing week to week now.
Right, and at one point the Chiefs owned the best record in football, or were tied with the best record in football, and we've seen production go down from both Alex Smith, from Alex Smith, as well as Kareem Hunt and Tyreek Hill. Do you figure there's a way that they're going to be able to get Hunt back flowing in it? Because I happen to be a Kareem Hunt owner, and this is killing me right now. It's the worst possible time for him to have kind of bottomed out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a Kareem Hunt owner myself, and I just don't have a lot of faith in the offensive line at this point. I mean, Hunt's a great producer with yards after contact and everything, but it's hard to really create when you're getting hit 2 yards in the backfield every play.
Absolutely. One more quarterback. I know I jumped ahead because we were on the Chiefs talk a little bit, but Marcus Mariota, 6 points in standard scoring leagues last week. Man, oh man. Not to take that step forward that I thought he was going to take. I own him in a couple leagues. Thankfully, I'm not relying on him at this point, but when I drafted him to be my number 1. Thankfully, in one league, I drafted Carson Wentz as well, and I've been able to not worry about that. But some people have really struggled with Marcus Mariota, as he has struggled as well.
No, absolutely. And I think he's been dinged up consistently, but he's just been out of rhythm and out of sync in this offense. And like you, I was expecting him to turn a corner and really break through and be an MVP candidate.
Yeah, it just goes to show you. I mean, everybody was thinking the same thing for Andy Dalton after his first couple of years. It's hard to be a Tom Brady or a Peyton Manning or an Aaron Rodgers. I mean, it's really hard to sustain that level of elite quarterback play. Hey, LaShawn McCoy hasn't been great in the second half. He hasn't been terrible, but he's had some real stinkers. I think if you draft him just based on drafting him, you have to stick with him, right? But he's caused some nervous moments especially for teams on the bubble.
Yeah, I think it's hard to have a lot of confidence in any Bills players at this point when they're so fluid and cavalier with their quarterback decisions.
Yeah, right. Yeah, what a terrible decision that was. Leonard Fournette, man, he had a big run in the first quarter, 17-yard run. He finished with like 19 yards for the game. In the second half was barely used, and TJ Yeldon was used on 3 straight series. What gives? Should I be worried if I'm a Fournette owner? Are you looking to bench him for other options, or are you keeping him in your starting line?
I think what the Jaguars are doing, because they're looking to make a playoff push of their own, and I think what they're thinking is, Fournette's a guy who's got a lot of wear on those tires from college. Let's limit those opportunities right now. Get him healthy, get him fresh for that big playoff push. But if you're a fantasy owner, that's worst case scenario for you with this rookie who's been productive up until this point.
So one more guy, CJ Anderson. I think by now, if you're having to rely on C.J. Anderson, you're in a lot of trouble. I think you cut bait with this guy. Here's an interesting one. Michael Thomas, again, through no fault of his own. I believe that the New Orleans offense has changed. I believe that Drew Brees doesn't have the arm strength he used to have. He's been decent in PPR leagues, but his overall scoring and yardage production has been down. Are you looking for another option to start instead of Mike Thomas?
I think if you're in a standard scoring league, you should be looking for another option at this point. PPR leagues, he should be productive for you because he's getting a fantastic amount of targets still.
Couple quick ones here I will just cover, and then we'll get to some of the tougher ones. Jordan Matthews, gone.
Yeah.
Let him go. He's been terrible. Emmanuel Sanders, again, I like the guy. Too much quarterback uncertainty in Denver. They can't figure it out. If you're relying on Emmanuel Sanders to get you into the playoffs, you're probably in trouble. But how about this one? Jordy Nelson. Do you realize that since the Aaron Rodgers injury, Jordy Nelson has 13 catches only for 103 yards? And as hard as this is for me to say, you can't start him right now.
Yeah. I think Jordy Nelson, you've got to bench him. And I think even worst case scenario, you might even be in a situation where you have to pick somebody else up and maybe even look to drop him.
Yeah, it's weird. It's such a weird, because I still think he's very talented, but the chemistry between Devontae Adams and Brett Hundley is off the charts right now. Golden Tate, last 2 games, he's combined for just 39 receiving yards after a huge game 3 weeks ago. Are you relying on him? Are you starting him this week?
You know, he's a tough one to crack at this point in the season. Big game, stinker. You got Matt Stafford at quarterback. I think it depends on what the rest of your roster looks like. If you're looking to get solid mid-level production and just a guy to chew up some points for you, I think he's your player. But if you're looking for a boom game, he's not your guy.
And this one, I think we kind of answered with the top story of the night. Evan Ingram was on a nice roll, having some productive back-to-back games. 2 stinkers in a row, and now uncertainty at quarterback, a new starter. I don't know that you can rely on Evan Ingram. Now, I know the pool, especially the waiver pool for tight ends, is a little bit shallow. But if you have another decent back, if you have a Charles Clay or somebody of that nature, maybe you have to sit Ingram right now.
Yeah, I think you do. And honestly, if you're a Giants owner of any kind, you're probably looking to cut bait and run at this point.
Absolutely. Well, we made it through another 30. We could talk for another 30 if time allowed, but unfortunately, Public House Media says too much of Scott Wisniewski is bad for the eyes. But Robert Gardner, my partner here on Tuesdays, I so am loving this, and we'll have some announcements in the next couple of weeks that there's a chance that we're going to be talking football even beyond the fantasy playoffs. So hopefully we can unveil some of that news in the next few weeks. But again, another stellar week, and it's always awesome being able to have these conversations on Tuesday.
Oh, absolutely. I look forward to this every week, and I look forward to talking fantasy football, and I can't wait for what's next.
Don't forget to join us Thursday, Kevin Wells and myself at 6:30. And then the next time we get together, Robert, next week at 7 o'clock, we'll be getting people ready for their fantasy postseason and for their playoffs. And that warms my heart to know that I can help some people win championships, hopefully. So for Robert, I'm Scott, Public House Media presenting Fantasy Wizards. Good night.